On the morning of March 17, 412 BC, the corpse-bearers of Yazd climbed the ancient Tower of Silence with their latest charge, a wealthy merchant named Hormizd who had died suddenly in his sleep. They laid his body in the prescribed circular pattern, exposed to the sky as Zoroastrian custom demanded. Within minutes, the vultures should have descended. They always descended, but not this time. The carrion birds circled overhead, dozens of them, their shadows crossing the stone platform in an endless dance. They screeched and called to one another, but not a single bird would land, not a single beak would touch the flesh that awaited them. The corpse-bearers watched in growing horror as the vultures, creatures that had consumed the dead of Yazd for generations, refused to perform their sacred duty. The priests declared it an omen, the merchants whispered of divine judgment, but the truth was far more terrifying than anyone in ancient Persia could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the Tower of Silence and the vultures that detected what human eyes could not see, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We dive deep into history's darkest corners every week, bringing you the stories that textbooks left out. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now, let's step back into ancient Persia, where death itself had rules, and breaking them could corrupt an entire city. The year is 412 BC. The Persian Empire stretches from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, the largest empire the world has ever known. But we're not in the golden palaces of Persepolis or the bustling streets of Babylon. We're in Yazd, an ancient city rising from the desert of central Persia, where the teachings of Zoroaster hold absolute power over life and death. Yazd sits at the crossroads of the Silk Road, its mud-brick buildings shimmering like mirages in the desert heat. Caravans arrive daily carrying silk from China, spices from India, and slaves from conquered territories. The city's wealth flows through the hands of merchant families who've traded here for generations, their fortunes built on the backs of camels and the trust of distant kings. But Yazd is different from other Persian cities in one crucial way. Here, the old religion still dominates. While other parts of the empire gradually adopt new customs, Yazd remains fiercely devoted to Zoroastrianism and its complex laws governing death and purity. At the center of these beliefs stands an imposing structure on the city's outskirts, the Dakma, or Tower of Silence. The tower rises 30 feet above the desert floor, a massive circular platform built from stone and clay. Its design is deliberate, calculated, sacred. The dead are brought here to be consumed by vultures, their flesh returned to the sky, their bones bleached white by the sun. This is not cruelty, this is cosmic order. Zoroastrians believe that earth, fire, and water are sacred elements that must never be polluted by death. Burial would corrupt the earth, cremation would defile fire. Only the sky can receive the dead without contamination. The vultures understand their role. Generations of them have nested in the cliffs surrounding Yazd, their instincts honed to the scent of human death. Within an hour of a body being placed on the tower, the birds descend in an organized frenzy, stripping flesh from bone with ruthless efficiency. It's a system that has worked without fail for centuries. But in the spring of 412 BC, something in Yazd is wrong. The city's elite have noticed subtle changes over the past 6 months. 3 prominent merchants have died suddenly, unusual but not unprecedented. What is unusual is the manner of their deaths. Each man was healthy one day, complaining of headaches and stomach pains the next, and dead within a week. The physicians attributed it to bad humors, tainted water, the position of the stars. No one questioned further. No one wanted to, because in Yazd, questioning the natural order of death means questioning the priests, and the priests answer to Hormizd the Elder, the wealthiest merchant in the city, and the primary benefactor of the Tower of Silence itself. His donations keep the corpse-bearers employed, the priests fed, and the sacred rituals performed. Hormizd's word is second only to the Magi in matters of religious observance, which makes his sudden death on March 16, 412 BC, all the more shocking. Hormizd was 53 years old, robust for his age, known for his iron constitution and sharp business mind. He controlled the saffron trade from Yazd to Babylon, a monopoly that had made his family wealthy beyond measure. On the evening of March 15th, he attended a dinner with fellow merchants, drank wine, laughed loudly, and discussed a new caravan route to avoid bandits in the eastern mountains. By midnight, he was vomiting. By dawn, he was convulsing. By noon the next day, Hormizd the Elder was dead, his face twisted in an expression witnesses described as surprise and betrayal. The priest performed the required rituals. The body was washed in bull's urine, the traditional Zoroastrian purification, the corpse bearers wearing their ceremonial leather garments to avoid direct contact with the defiling flesh, lifted Hormiz's body onto the wooden carrier. At sunrise on March 17th, they began the procession to the Tower of Silence, and the vultures, for the first time in living memory, refused to eat. The rejection of Hormiz's body sent shockwaves through Yazd's religious hierarchy. High Priest Darius, keeper of the tower, had never witnessed such an occurrence. The sacred texts mentioned that vultures would refuse corpses contaminated by demons or dark magic, but such cases were theoretical, warnings from an ancient time. This was different. This was real. For 3 days, Hormiz's body lay untouched on the tower platform. The vultures continued their aerial vigil, circling but never landing. The corpse-bearers, terrified of divine retribution, refused to remove the body. Zoroastrian law forbade touching a corpse once it had been consecrated to the sky. The city fell into a state of religious crisis. On the 4th day, a junior priest named Mithra made an observation that changed everything. He had been studying the vultures' behavior from the base of the tower, and he noticed something peculiar. The birds weren't avoiding the tower itself. They landed freely on the outer walls and the lower levels where older bones had been collected. They were specifically avoiding Hormiz's body. When the wind shifted and carried the scent away from the tower, the vultures would descend slightly. When it shifted back, they would retreat. They fear the smell, Mithra reported to the high priest. Not the corpse, but something within it. High Priest Darius ordered an unprecedented investigation. He gathered the 3 most experienced corpse-bearers and gave them a task that violated every principle of their profession. Examine the body. Touch it. Investigate it. Find what kept the sacred birds at bay. What they discovered would have remained hidden if not for one corpse-bearer's keen observation. Javad, a man who had been handling the dead for 30 years, noticed that Hormiz's fingernails had turned a peculiar shade of blue-black. The discoloration extended up the nail beds in thin lines. When Javad pressed on the dead man's abdomen, a thin, greenish fluid seeped from the mouth, not the normal decomposition fluids, but something else. Something that burned Javad's nostrils with an acrid metallic scent. The corpse-bearers reported their findings to High Priest Darius, who consulted the city's most knowledgeable physician, a Greek named Philemon, who had studied in Alexandria before settling in Yazd. Philemon examined the body from a distance, refusing to touch it directly, and asked a series of pointed questions. Shions, had Hormiz complained of metallic taste before death? Yes. Had his hands trembled in his final hours? Yes. Had he experienced excessive thirst despite drinking constantly? Yes. Philemon's face darkened. He asked to examine the bodies of the 3 merchants who had died in the previous months, but that was impossible. Their flesh had been consumed, their bones collected and stored in the tower's ossuary pit. Except for one detail no one had considered important until now. Zoroastrian tradition dictated that the bones remain in the ossuary for 1 year before final disposal. The skeletal remains of the 3 deceased merchants were retrieved and laid out in the temple. Philemon examined them with the focused intensity of a man confirming his worst suspicions. He paid particular attention to the bones themselves, scraping samples into clay vessels, noting the unusual brittleness of the marrow. On the evening of March 20th, 412 BC, Philemon delivered his verdict to an emergency council of priests and city elders. His words, recorded in fragments that survived in later Zoroastrian texts, were chilling. This man was not claimed by disease or the will of Ahura Mazda. He was murdered by poison, a slow, deliberate administration of something I have seen only once before. In the palace intrigues of Alexandria, the symptoms, the discoloration, the vulture's refusal, they all point to the same substance: arsenic. The word meant nothing to most of the council. Arsenic was not widely known in Persia at this time, though Greek physicians had documented its properties. Philemon explained it was a mineral, colorless and nearly tasteless when refined, that could be administered in small doses over time. Each dose alone would cause only mild discomfort, easily attributed to common illness. But accumulated in the body, it became lethal, and after death it remained in the tissues, the bones, detectable to creatures whose survival depended on avoiding poisoned carrion. The vultures knew what the humans didn't: Hormiz's flesh was toxic. To consume it meant death. Their instinct, refined over millions of years of evolution, overrode centuries of conditioning. They would starve before eating poison. The implications crashed over the council like a wave. If Hormizd was murdered, and if his symptoms matched those of the 3 previous deaths, then Yazd had a serial poisoner, someone with access to rare substances, someone with knowledge of foreign methods, someone who moved among the merchant class with ease and trust. High Priest Darius made a decision that would later be recorded as both wise and terrible. He ordered the bones of all wealthy merchants who had died in Yazd over the past 2 years to be examined. Every prominent death would be investigated. Every family would be questioned. The sacred Tower of Silence would become a crime scene. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. It helps us bring more forgotten mysteries to light. Share this with someone who loves dark history and archaeological discoveries. The investigation that followed would uncover a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Persian society. Let's discover what happens next. The systematic examination of Yazd's recent dead began on March 22, 412 BC, and what emerged over the following weeks painted a picture of calculated, methodical murder spanning nearly 3 years. Philemon established a grim workshop in a building near the Tower of Silence. Bones were brought to him in systematic order, first the most recent deaths, then working backward through time. He developed a crude but effective testing method, grinding bone samples into powder, mixing them with various substances, and observing the reactions. When mixed with sulfur compounds, arsenic-contaminated bone powder produced a distinctive garlic-like odor. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Of the 47 prominent merchant deaths in the past 3 years, Philemon identified 12 that showed signs of arsenic poisoning, 12 murders, disguised as natural deaths, hidden within the normal mortality rate of a bustling trade city. But the pattern wasn't random. Every victim shared specific characteristics. They were wealthy, they controlled significant trade routes, and they had no male heirs, only daughters or distant relatives who stood to inherit their businesses. The investigation team, now including Persian officials sent from the regional capital, began mapping the victims' social connections. They created what might be one of history's first criminal networks diagrams, drawn in colored inks on stretched leather. Lines connected victims to their families, business associates, and social circles. As the diagram grew more complex, one name appeared with disturbing frequency: Parvane. Parvane was Hormizd the Elder's 3rd wife, married to him for 7 years. She was 41 years old, unusually educated for a woman of her time, and known throughout Yazd for her skill in preparing elaborate meals. She had come to Yazd from Babylon, where her father had been a physician. Some whispered, a physician who had fallen out of favor with the royal court for unclear reasons. The investigators discovered that Parvane had attended dinner parties at the homes of 11 of the 12 poisoning victims in the months before their deaths. She was known as an excellent guest, often bringing small gifts of spiced honey cakes or medicinal teas she prepared herself. In Zoroastrian Persian culture, such gifts were considered signs of respect and friendship. No one questioned them, no one tested them, but it was the financial records that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Working with Babylonian accountants familiar with commercial contracts, the investigators traced property transfers following each death. The pattern was sophisticated and nearly invisible. After each merchant died, their businesses didn't pass to distant relatives as expected. Instead, through a complex series of debt transfers, marriage arrangements, and legal maneuvers, controlling interests eventually flowed to a small group of investors. At the center of this group stood Hormizd the Elder. For nearly 3 years, Hormizd had been systematically eliminating his commercial rivals and absorbing their trade routes. The profits were staggering. His wealth had tripled during this period. He had become the most powerful merchant in Yazd, with influence reaching into the imperial court itself, and his wife, educated in the medical knowledge of Babylon, had been his weapon. But something had gone wrong. The investigators found evidence that Hormizd had recently begun negotiations to take a 4th wife, a young woman from a prominent family. Divorce was possible under Persian law, but it would mean Parvane would lose her status, her wealth, and potentially her life if she returned to Babylon in disgrace. The Greek physician Philemon pieced together the final act. Parvane had prepared one last poisoned meal, this time for her husband. But knowing the vultures might detect the poison, she had administered a massive dose, enough to kill quickly, before Hormizd could change his will or expose her role in the murders. She gambled that his death would be attributed to divine judgment or natural causes, and that she would inherit his empire before anyone grew suspicious. She had not anticipated the Vultures' refusal. She had not anticipated that their ancient instincts would expose her crime. On April 3, 412 BC, Persian guards arrived at Hormiz's estate to arrest Parvaneh. They found her in the kitchen, calmly grinding minerals with a mortar and pestle. On the table before her lay enough refined arsenic to kill 100 men. She did not resist. According to the official records, she looked up at the guards and spoke only once. The birds saw what you could not. A search of the estate revealed Parvaneh's workshop, a hidden room behind the kitchen, where she had spent 3 years perfecting the art of murder. Clay jars contained minerals imported from throughout the empire. Detailed notes, written in Babylonian script, documented each victim, their symptoms, the doses administered, the time until death. It was methodical. It was scientific. It was terrifying in its precision. One document stood out among the others, a letter from Parvaneh's father, still in Babylon, dated 2 years prior. In it, he apologized for teaching her the properties of arsenic, saying he had meant it as medical knowledge, not as a tool for revenge. He begged her to stop before she was discovered. The letter had been read but not responded to. Parvaneh had continued her work undeterred. The legal proceedings that followed Parvaneh's arrest were unprecedented in Persian judicial history. The case combined elements of criminal murder, religious sacrilege, and commercial fraud, crimes that fell under different jurisdictions and legal codes. The regional governor requested guidance from the imperial court at Persepolis, and for nearly 2 months, Parvaneh remained imprisoned while legal scholars debated her fate. The challenge lay in Persian legal tradition, which had no established precedent for a woman poisoning multiple victims over an extended period. Murder cases were typically straightforward: a killing in anger, a theft gone wrong, a family dispute turned violent, reconfiscated by the imperial treasury. Their families were stripped of status. The commercial hierarchy of Yazd collapsed overnight. The most shocking revelation came when investigators examined Hormiz's personal correspondence. They found letters exchanged with a court official in Persepolis, a man named Artabanus who served as an advisor on trade policy. The letters were circumspect, written in commercial language, but their meaning was clear. Hormiz had been providing Artabanus with a percentage of his profits in exchange for favorable trade regulations and protection from oversight. The corruption reached into the heart of the imperial administration. Artabanus was recalled to Persepolis and tried for bribery and dereliction of duty. He was found guilty but, as a member of the Persian nobility, spared execution. Instead, he was exiled to a remote garrison on the eastern frontier where he would spend the remainder of his life overseeing a minor outpost. His family's reputation never recovered. Later, Persian texts refer to the shame of Artabanus as shorthand for corruption disguised as commerce. The case against Parvaneh's father in Babylon proved more complex. Babylonian law operated independently of Persian law, and the evidence that he had taught his daughter about poisons was circumstantial. He claimed his instruction had been purely medical, intended to help Parvaneh treat illness in her household. Without direct proof of complicity, Babylonian courts declined to prosecute. He lived the rest of his life in obscurity, his physician practice ruined by association with his daughter's crimes. Parvaneh herself maintained her composure throughout the legal proceedings. Multiple observers noted her calmness, her lack of emotion, her analytical responses to questions. When asked why she had committed the murders, she gave an answer that was recorded and discussed by Persian scholars for centuries afterward. I learned from my father that the body is a mechanism, subject to natural laws. I learned from my husband that commerce is a game, won by those willing to take what others will not. I merely combined these lessons. If I am guilty of anything, it is understanding too well how the world functions. This response, cold, logical, devoid of remorse, troubled the Persian court deeply. It suggested a worldview completely divorced from the religious and moral framework that governed Persian society. Parvaneh saw herself not as a criminal but as a rational actor in an amoral universe. This was heresy of a profound kind, more dangerous than the murders themselves. On August 2, 412 BC, Parvaneh was taken to the execution ground outside Yazd. Contemporary accounts describe a crowd of thousands, including merchants from across Persia who had come to witness justice for their murdered colleagues. The stoning lasted 23 minutes. Parvaneh did not scream, did not beg, and according to witnesses, smiled just before the first stone struck. Her body was sealed in a lead coffin and buried in an unmarked location in the desert, the coordinates known only to the high priest and the regional governor. The location was never recorded officially. It was intended that Parvaneh would be forgotten, erased from both the earth and from memory. But memory, as it turned out, had other plans. The Tower of Silence murders transformed Zoroastrian death practices and Persian law in ways that echoed through the remaining centuries of the empire and beyond. The most immediate change came to the operation of the towers themselves. High Priest Darius, traumatized by his role in uncovering the murders, instituted new protocols for handling the dead. Before any body could be placed on the tower, it would be examined by both a corpse-bearer and a physician. Any suspicious deaths, particularly among the wealthy, would be investigated before sky burial was permitted. These rules, codified in religious texts around 410 BC, spread to other Zoroastrian communes throughout Persia and Central Asia. The Vultures' role in exposing the murders elevated their status in Zoroastrian tradition. They came to be seen not merely as instruments of disposal but as divine guardians, capable of perceiving corruption that humans could not detect. Later Zoroastrian texts, including commentaries on the Avesta written in the Sasanian period, reference the wisdom of the birds as evidence of cosmic order manifesting in nature. The story of Yazd's vultures became a teaching example used in religious education. More significantly, the case established legal precedents for circumstantial evidence and pattern analysis in Persian law. Before Parvaneh's trial, Persian courts relied primarily on witness testimony and physical evidence directly linking an accused to a crime. The Yazd case demonstrated that systematic patterns, bone analysis, financial records, behavioral observations, could constitute proof when direct witnesses were unavailable. This marked a significant evolution in Persian jurisprudence, moving toward what we would recognize as forensic investigation. The concept spread beyond Persia. Greek historians visiting the Persian court in the late 5th century BC learned of the case and brought accounts back to Athens and other city-states. While details became distorted through retelling, the core idea, that careful observation of patterns could reveal hidden crimes, influenced Greek legal thinking. Some scholars argue that the methodical approach used in Parvaneh's investigation can be traced to later developments in Greek scientific thinking. The economic aftermath in Yazd was equally profound. The dismantling of Hormizd's commercial empire created a power vacuum in the saffron trade. For nearly a decade, Yazd's economy struggled as smaller merchants fought for control of trade routes. The imperial government eventually intervened, establishing regulated trading companies with imperial oversight, one of the earliest examples of state involvement in commercial activity in Persian history. The case also sparked debate about education and poison knowledge throughout the ancient world. Should physicians be taught about toxic substances? If so, how could that knowledge be controlled to prevent abuse? These questions had no easy answers, but they led to the establishment of what we might call ethical guidelines for medical practitioners. The Hippocratic Oath, finalized in Greece around 400 BC, includes the famous pledge, "I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan." While the oath predates Parvaneh's case, some historians believe reports from Persia influenced its final formulation and widespread adoption. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Yazd murders influenced the development of toxicology as a field of study. Philemon's methods for detecting arsenic in bone were primitive, but they represented a crucial step, the idea that poisons could be detected after death, that they left traces that careful investigation could uncover. This concept spread through medical communities in the ancient world. By the Roman period, physicians were actively studying poisons and developing more sophisticated detection methods. The story also revealed uncomfortable truths about women's roles in ancient Persian society. Parvaneh was educated, intelligent, and capable, qualities that might have led to legitimate achievement in a different social structure. But as a woman in a society where wealth and power flowed through male lineage, her options were limited. She chose a dark path, but historians have noted that her choice reflected broader constraints. The case sparked some discussion in Persian intellectual circles about women's education and status, though meaningful reforms were centuries away. In later Persian literature, Parvaneh became a cautionary figure, the intelligent woman who used her gifts for evil, the wife who betrayed her husband, the poisoner who corrupted the sacker. Order. But she also became something else, a symbol of how social constraints could create monsters. Persian poets in the Islamic period occasionally referenced her story when discussing justice and gender, seeing in her crimes an indictment not just of individual evil but of systemic failures. The Tower of Silence itself remained in operation for over 2 millennia, even after the Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century AD. Zoroastrian communities continued to practice sky burial. The towers still stand today in Yazd and other regions, though most are no longer in active use. Modern Zoroastrians grapple with how to maintain their traditions in a world where vulture populations have declined and urban development has encroached on traditional burial grounds. But the vultures' refusal to eat, that moment on March 17, 412 BC, when instinct exposed what investigation had missed, remains one of history's most remarkable intersections of biology, crime, and justice. It reminds us that nature operates on laws older and more fundamental than human deception, and that sometimes the truth reveals itself through channels we never anticipated. What do you think drove Parvane to such calculated evil? Was she a product of her constraints, a psychopath ahead of her time, or simply someone who understood power better than those around her? Leave your theories in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of the best insights come from our community discussions. If this story fascinated you, subscribe to Fear Sermon for more lost chapters of history that refuse to stay buried. We explore the intersections of mystery, horror, and human nature every week, bringing you stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. Next week, we're investigating another case where nature revealed what humans tried to hide: the medieval poisoning detected by a castle's cats, and the plague doctor who unraveled a conspiracy that reached into the Vatican itself. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. Share this video with anyone who loves dark history, forensic mysteries, or stories about ancient justice. And remember, history's most terrifying monsters often wore the most ordinary faces. See you in the next video. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and never forget that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the light.